Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to another video to do with the SuperSocket 7 platform. So over the last few weeks, we analyzed a bunch of graphics cards, and this is the system I ended up picking as my final configuration. I went for the 3DFX Voodoo 3500 with my ghetto fan modification, dual sound card setup. We've got the Aureal Vortex 2 and the Sound Blaster W64. Because I'm using two sound cards, I'm using an external mixer to mix the AW64 and the Aureal Vortex 2. You can just configure the volumes by turning these dials. Very convenient, and they don't cost too much, and I definitely recommend getting one of these if you're running multiple sound cards. A 80GB SATA hard drive with an SATA to ID adapter, a standard optical drive, and of course the DFI SuperSocket 7 motherboard, 128 megabytes of SD memory, and a K6 3 Plus processor, 400 megahertz but overclocked to 550 megahertz. Some of the things we're going to look at is the 3DFX driver, the driver tweaks and how to get the most out of your graphics card. I'll show you how to use the MS-DOS mode and how to switch between Windows and DOS, how to deal with games that run too fast under Windows but also under DOS. A couple of software tools will help us with that. I'll show you what a MiniGL driver is and what benefit that gives you, and we'll have a few games to look at. Standard VGA games, 3D FX Glide accelerated games under DOS and Windows, high resolution SVGA DOS games, and yeah, basically a feature-packed video where I'm just gonna demonstrate and showcase what you can do with such a SuperSocket 7 machine. Windows games that run too fast are easily taken care of with the SuperSocket 7 platform. The processor we're using, the AMD K6 3 Plus, has a software controllable multiplier which works in real time. You don't have to reboot your computer. So using Crystal CPU ID, we can see we've got a clock speed of 550 megahertz with a frontside bus of 100, and the multiplier is set to 5.5. So let's say you're running a game that runs too fast and is giving you issues. You can use this program, K6 Speed. So just run it. It'll ask you to set your maximum multiplier, which in my case is 5.5. Press OK, and then using the slower and faster buttons, you can change the multiplier. So we're gonna drop it down to a 2x multiplier, and we've got a clock speed of 200 megahertz. So now we go back here, just press F5 to refresh the information, and you can now see that the machine is running at 200 megahertz with a 2x multiplier. Because I'm using two sound cards, it takes a little bit of a configuration to make them work, and the way you do this is I installed the Sound Blaster AW64 first, the ISA card, and then in Device Manager, after it had installed the drivers, I just right-clicked Properties and ticked the box Disable in this hardware profile, and I did this for all the Sound Blaster entries. And once I've done that, I rebooted the machine, inserted the Aureal Vortex 2, the PCI sound card, and then installed the PCI drivers for the Aureal Vortex 2. That way, under Windows, we are exclusively using the Aureal Vortex 2, and when we boot into DOS, we can use the AW64. Another huge benefit of the SuperSocket 7 platform is the flexibility of running Windows 98 or 95 as well as MS-DOS. And what you do is you just restart into MS-DOS mode. However, there's a lot more to it. And I get this question all the time, that people out there, you've built a Windows 98 gaming machine, but then things don't work out in MS-DOS. The process is a little bit complicated, and I've done a separate video that shows you how to configure the MS-DOS mode properly. And when I say properly, it gives you a boot menu with memory options, but also a working mouse and CD-ROM driver. So this takes care of all the tricky stuff, so you don't have to manually edit configuration files. You can just copy-paste them, but you have to watch the video. There are quite a few steps. So the reason I created this menu is because some DOS games need extended memory, some need expanded memory, some don't like any of those, they need the option conventional memory only, and sometimes you don't need a mouse or you don't need a CD-ROM driver, for example, for benchmarking, but I'm going to go with the first option, expanded memory, with a mouse driver and the CD-ROM driver loaded. And for the sound card, I just wrote myself a little batch file, sblast, and that configures the Sound Blaster drivers. You might be using a different sound card, so just create your own little batch file. That is the easiest way of doing this. So let's play some Doom 2. I always like to run the setup and make sure that everything is configured correctly. So I'm using an AW64, which you just select the AW32 option for the music, and for the Sound Blaster, 220, 5, and 1 is the configuration for my system. Those are the default settings, and then we can just run the game. Now you might be wondering why I'm using a widescreen monitor for DOS. Simple reason, I just like to switch out my equipment to make sure it all works and just to mix it up a little bit. Now there are even some DOS games that received special patches to enable glide on Voodoo games. So I'm just going to showcase 2 games. So this is Screamer 2 with the 3dfx patch. And you just got to be a bit careful which patch you use. There are usually 2 types of patches, one for the original 3dfx Voodoo, so the very first one, and then one for later cards like the Voodoo Rush, the Voodoo 2, and the Voodoo Banshee. And in this game, in Screamer 2, you have to install the Voodoo Rush patch, and then the game also works on the Voodoo 3. And the benefits are smoother frames, filtered textures, and just an overall nicer image compared to the software render. And the other game is of course Tomb Raider, and there are also 2 types of patches available. One for the original 3dfx Voodoo, and the second patch is called the Voodoo Rush patch, and that will work on the Voodoo 3. And once again, we get a higher resolution, filtered textures, and just an overall much nicer image compared to the standard DOS render. So this is System Shock, and it is the CD version which supports high resolution graphics. So this game runs at 640 by 480, which is a little bit demanding for a DOS gaming machine, but the K63 Plus has no issues at all with this game. It is super smooth, and you should really enjoy this game if you happen to play this one. Games that run too fast under DOS can also be easily made to work with the SuperSocket 7 platform. The SetMal program is a fantastic little tool that allows you to not only change the CPU multiplier inside DOS, but also to disable the processor cache. So for example, if I type in SetMal 2.0, that will set the multiplier to 2, giving me a clock speed of 200, and then I can use the L1D command, which will disable the internal cache of the processor, and it confirms it here. It says here multiplier is now 2.0 and disabling level 1 cache, and that should get some of those games that run a little bit too fast working properly. Now, even with the multiplier reduced and the internal cache disabled, we will still run into some games that run a little bit too fast. Test Drive 3 is such an example. So that game still runs too fast. To fix a game like this, we have to go into the BIOS and turn off the motherboard cache. So here we have the BIOS, and we can see the CPU cache, which is often called the level 1 cache, and then the external cache, which is on the motherboard. So the motherboard has its own little cache. And the K6-3 processor also has level 2 cache, so there are 3 levels of cache. We can configure the internal CPU cache with software, with SetMal, but we cannot configure the external motherboard cache. So the only way to do this is by accessing the BIOS. The good news is disabling the motherboard cache on the K6-3 Plus and the K6-2 Plus, because they have very fast level 2 cache, the performance impact is minimal. So you might, for convenience reasons, you might actually leave it disabled. But do your own benchmarks first to see what performance impact that makes. Okay, so I've once again disabled the level 1 cache, the CPU cache, and also lowered the multiplier. And in the BIOS, we've disabled the motherboard cache. So the game Test Drive 3 should now work fine. The game works fine. My driving skills do not. And to go back into Windows, you just type exit and the machine will restart and boot into Windows. Now you don't have to raise the multiplier. Every time you reboot, the multiplier will reset. The latest reference drivers for the Voodoo 3 work really well, and I've used them to do all the benchmarking. However, there are third-party drivers and they're well worth checking out. The one that I can highly recommend is the Amiga Merlin version 2.9. Now you can download them from my website, but another excellent resource is Falcon Fly. That guy who runs that website has all the Voodoo drivers on the website and also tools, and definitely worth checking out. So you just install it through setup, and I've already installed it. After installing the driver, there are a couple of options that I like to configure. Firstly, I reset the factory defaults, and then I'll go to the Direct3D and OpenGL options, and a couple of settings that I recommend changing and that you should be aware of. The first one is speed setting. This will configure the vertical synchronization. For benchmarking, you want this to be disabled. For gaming, I like VSync to be turned on so I don't get any tearing. Then there are 2 options here, the 3D filter quality and alpha blending. If you set these to high and the other one to sharper, this will activate the 22-bit post-processing filter, which makes 16-bit games look a little bit nicer. And also this setting here, I recommend turning this on. This will make textures on the ground look a little bit nicer as they go into the distance. Now hit the apply button to enable all of that, and then do the same thing for OpenGL. So 3D filter quality and alpha blending to high and to sharper, and turn on the filtering here to make the textures look a little bit nicer. Compatibility with the Glide engine is a huge benefit of having a Voodoo card, but there are also some MiniGL drivers. These are basically wrappers. They support just enough of the OpenGL standard to run the games, and you usually get a little bit of a performance boost. So we've got the game of Quake 2 here, and there's a file 3dfx GL and we're just gonna copy paste this into the Quake 2 game folder and override it, and I'm gonna have a look at the performance difference. Now remember, whenever you benchmark, make sure that the VSync is turned off, otherwise you're not gonna get the correct results. So here we can choose between the default OpenGL driver and the faster one for 3dfx, which will use the MiniGL. So we're going to benchmark the default driver first. So we're getting exactly 60 FPS. So let's switch out the driver for the 3dfx driver and run the demo again. So we're now getting 74.8 FPS, so that's a nice little boost. A bit of a shame, not all games have a MiniGL driver, so the ones that are supported here are GLQuake, Half-Life, Heretic 2, Hexen 2, Quake 2 and Sin. And there are a couple of versions, and the version 1.47, that's the fastest one for the K6 platform. So if you're building a SuperSocket 7 machine and you've got a K6 processor, that's the version you want to use. AMD 3D Now are processor extensions that when used in your programming can unlock extra performance, and AMD used Quake 2 to showcase what this technology is capable of. So they released a patch, and I'm just gonna install this patch into my Quake 2 folder. So it's gonna overwrite a few files, there you go. But there is another step we have to do in order to get the maximum performance of the 3D Now optimization as well as of the MiniGL driver. So we have to rename the MiniGL driver to OpenGL32.dll. And now we can just run the game. And we can see this is a special version from AMD, not supported. So we just go into the options, and we have a few more options to choose from here, the 3D Now optimized drivers, and we need to select this one here, the 3D Now OpenGL driver. The other one doesn't work, so that's the one we're going to choose. And this ensures that we have maximum performance, so we're getting the performance boost from the 3D Now optimizations as well as from the MiniGL driver. So let's quickly run the time demo. .3 FPS. So that's a massive boost from around 60 FPS without any tuning up to 88.3. With AMD being the underdog, there are not too many games with explicit 3D Now technology support, and at least nothing with the kind of performance boost that you can see with Quake 2. Expendable, however, does have some nice support for AMD 3D Now, and it's got a really nice splash screen that makes any owner of a K6 processor feel a little bit proud about the purchase. The 3dfx Glide engine is a real highlight of any Voodoo graphics card, and we're gonna look at a few games here. And if you look at the README files, you can always find references to 3dfx. For example, here 3D graphics render, 3dfx Glide, or OpenGL compatible. And usually you would get a little bit better performance with 3dfx Glide, but also compatibility. The game manufacturers made sure that the games would work on a Voodoo card. Here we are in the game, and we can see here it's using the OpenGL driver, but we can just switch that to Glide, and we can also increase the resolution to something a bit sharper. And here we are in the game. I've never played this, I've got no idea what we have to do here, but it looks fairly sharp, and the frames, the performance is also pretty decent, so let's try it. Another game. So here we've got another game. It's a demo version of Terminus, and you can switch between Glide and Direct 3D.
Commercial vessel Omni requesting clearance. I've uploaded my manifest to SetMal.
Just passengers? All right, let's get it on. 925 is leading this convoy. Make sure she safely arrives at South Rhea.
And this is another game, MiG-29, and also supporting the Glide engine, so just gonna increase the resolution. Not much of a flight sim guy, so let's see if I can get off the ground. I must say this game looks absolutely gorgeous, very crisp and detailed. But yeah, I don't really know how to play it. So, but yeah, looks very, very nice indeed. And that wraps up the SuperSocket 7 project. Thanks guys for watching. Hopefully this particular video gave you a good idea of why I'm such a fan of the SuperSocket 7 platform. It is just so flexible. You can play DOS, you can play old DOS, 386 games, 486 games, games that run well on a Pentium. Games that want a Pentium 2 for high resolution, you can run all of them. You can also play early Windows 3D games and even some of the more demanding like Quake 2 for example. So absolutely flexible, fantastic platform, and I don't know many machines where you can play such a wide range of games, and that's really what this machine is all about. Of course, nothing will replace a dedicated 386. Nothing is going to replace a dedicated Pentium 3 Unreal Voodoo machine if that's what you want. But if you're building one machine to cover a vast range of games, the SuperSocket 7 platform is really hard to beat. I learned a lot about some of these video cards that I've never used before, and I'm also a lot more confident now giving advice as to what video card and sound card is recommended and which cards don't make a lot of sense and should be avoided. As always, eager to hear from you. Leave me some comments down below. What do you think about this SuperSocket 7 stuff? And I'm looking forward to doing something new. Not quite sure what the next project is all about, but I will definitely stay with one topic for a while. I found it actually logistically a lot easier to stick with one project and do a bunch of videos. So that's something I definitely want to continue. Thanks for watching guys, and see you soon.